Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first event in our 2025 Sutherland Institute Congressional Series. My name is Derek Monson. I'm with Sutherland Institute, and I'm happy to welcome everyone joining us in our the students here in our audience or on the live stream. Thank you to Congressman Moore and his staff for being here today to speak with us and making this event possible. I also want to take a moment to give a few special thank yous before we get going. First of all, to our generous sponsor, Zions Bank, who is sponsoring all of the Congressional Series events, and to the Hinckley Institute, who is our host today, especially Jason Perry, Nick Cockrell, and all the Hinckley Institute staff and students who are partnering with us in making these events possible. Sutherland Institute exists to equip voters and policymakers to advance public policy on principles and values grounded in our Constitution and informed by sound evidence and debate. Our Congressional Series is an extension of that mission, and it's designed to give voters, and especially students here on campus, our future leaders, the opportunity to engage with and hear from their federal elected officials in a deeper and more thoughtful way than is typically afforded by social media or sound bites. With that goal in mind, here's how our events will proceed. Jason Perry from Hinckley Institute will take a moment to tell us a little bit about the Hinckley Institute that he leads, and then we will immediately turn the time over to our moderator, who is Nic Dunn from Sutherland Institute, and to Representative Moore, and they'll give us have a conversation about important policy issues happening in our nation's capital. After their conversation, we will say goodbye to our live stream audience and have some time for questions from our in-person audience before we conclude. And I'll turn the time to Jason.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. How's the first day of school? How's the parking? Bad. Sorry. Let's thought we'd start with that. It's unlikely to improve. The rest of the day, however, will. We're just so happy to have you here. I'm Jason Perry, the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics, celebrating our 60th year here at the University of Utah, oldest internship program in the country. And it all started with Robert H. Hinckley. His picture's on the wall. I thought I'd mention this because our benefactor is here today, the chairman of our board. I hope you don't mind. Jim Hinckley is here in the audience with us here today, raising his hand. The person that helps make sure that we can still send interns out all over the world. Jim, thank you for being here with us today. The job of the Hinckley Institute is make sure you have a chance to hear from the greatest minds in the country, ask your questions, to hear different viewpoints, make your own decisions about things. That's what we do here at the Hinckley Institute. We'll have forums all year long, and those of you who have not been interns yet, it's time to start thinking about it, all right? This is our first congressional moderated panel that we're going to have, and we're just so happy to be connected to the Sutherland Institute. This has become a tradition where we have all members of our delegation coming here in this very room to talk to the students and to hear some questions. So we're so glad you're here. Look forward to getting to know you better during the rest of the semester. With that, I'm going to turn the time over to Nick, and we'll get things started.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Obviously, thanks again to Zions Bank and Hinckley Institute for the wonderful role that they provide to our community, and to all of you being in the room, and to the folks on the live stream. It's a very unique and exciting thing to be able to have such important conversations with people here and across the country via the internet. So we're very grateful to all of you spending some time with us, and of course grateful to Congressman Moore for being with us to talk through some of these important issues. Congressman, the first thing I wanted to start with is the big legislative debate of the year so far in our nation's capital has been the One Big Beautiful Bill.
Yeah.
And so I want to start there and maybe ask you to give some insights. If I can read briefly, after the bill passed, you said the following in a written statement from your office: "This bill is in direct response to what Americans have communicated they want: competitive tax rates, a more secure border, bolstered domestic energy resources, more support for our military, and less government waste. I worked to get on the Ways and Means and Budget committees for this very moment to represent Utah in this historic effort to lower taxes for hardworking families and support our small business owners." So can you give your perspective, obviously representing your district in Congress, and also as your position on the Ways and Means Committee, why do you think the One Big Beautiful Bill overall is good for Utah and good for America?
Thanks. Yeah, happy to kind of address that a little bit. Mentioning the district. A tough day for the first district. Had 2 police officers killed over the weekend, another injured, and a K-9 as well. Just as kind of a realization of how difficult that job is. We got a great mayor up in Tremonton, a town that you don't often hear this type of stuff happening from. So it's a little bit of a little shocking, no matter where it happens. But so my heart goes out to northern Utah, and I know Box Elder County. I'm actually going to be there. This is like the 100th anniversary of the Box Elder Rodeo, and we'll be up there later this week. But a tough day regardless. So, and so budget wasn't on my mind when I got that news this morning. And anytime something really devastating happens in your district, you're completely powerless to do anything about it and to console the folks that do it. You put out a statement, call the mayor, but just as a reminder, the dangers that our law enforcement go through, it's just something to remember, I think, and so it's important to kind of reflect on it. And then the big beautiful bill, right? I actually tried to name it something different. I tried to name it the Make Economy Great Again, the Mega Act. I lost. Speaker Johnson didn't accept it, and I'm still angry at him about that. As it rolls off the tongue a little bit easier. And every single outlet from Wall Street Journal to CNBC, they just call it the mega bill. And I'm like, we could have just saved us all the trouble, but it is what it is. In 2017, Republicans took on an initiative in Congress. They said, okay, we have a tax code that could use some significant reform. I even had Secretary Yellen, President Biden's choice for Treasury, communicate in my dialogue with her in the Ways and Means hearing that we had. That was, look, she said, yes, we believe the corporate rate was too high. Democrats believe the corporate rate was too high. We don't think it needed to go to 21, and Republicans believed it needed to go to 21. Right? That was the 2017 one. I bring it up because in my statement, that's the point that I made, was competitive taxes. We have data. OECD, right? The kind of like the global for developed nations threshold for where you put taxation measures in place. We're with 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, we took a lot of specific taxation numbers and put them right in the meat of the curve. We're not even the lowest. We're actually still on the upper end, and particularly when you add in state taxes that companies are also subject to. We're still at risk of being higher than other states. But we put it in the range of competitiveness. And what we saw from 2017 to today was that revenues continued to drive. When you lower the rate and broaden the base, you create more economic activity, you still get a flourishing of good tax policy that drives economic growth. And so there's a lot out there that this is just tax breaks for the billionaires at the backs of the working class. And it's fundamentally false, but it is a good line to be able to spew, but it's not accurate, right? When Democrats when they had the White House, House, and Senate in 2021 and 2022, they actually didn't touch any of this tax policy. Let me make it very, very simple by talking about something super complex that I don't even fully understand. It's called FDII, Foreign Derived Intangible Income. If you want to study this type of stuff, I encourage you to take a look at it. But our rates were at 16, effective rate about 16%. Ireland's rates were in the range of 13. Multinational companies that are maybe headquartered here in the U.S. but do business elsewhere, they have options to put their tax, their tax structure. They get to choose, hey, we do business here, we can put some of our tax structure here. There are many companies that put their intellectual property in places like Ireland. Now, Ireland's a good ally of ours. We want to have a good, strong relationship with them. We want companies, competing and providing goods and services internationally. But companies were deciding to, what's called inversions. They were deciding to put their tax structure overseas in a different nation, thus paying a lower rate, but paying that revenue to a different country. When 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act took place, all inversions stopped and companies started to repatriate their revenues back here. They were still paying taxes, But they're like, okay, if we get a 13% rate here or there, we're going to choose the U.S. every time. And so once we made that competitive, we got a whole bunch of companies putting their money back into the U.S. economy and continuing to drive up revenue. So we've seen revenue growth happen since the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And the way that the scoring worked, all of those tax provisions, most of them, not most of them, were put on a deadline to expire at the end of this year. And that's why there was this urgency to not let that happen, because we want to keep those tax rates competitive so you can still see economic growth in the U.S. We did a great bipartisan bill 2 years ago. It ultimately didn't pass over in the Senate. But most of what we did there in a bipartisan way made it into this. But in the nature of a reconciliation bill, they become very partisan. And that is what it is. So we accomplished that. We worked really hard on that over the last year and a half on the Ways and Means Committee to go out and understand all the certain types of tax elements of the 2017 tax bill and what was important about it, what we needed to keep, what could be adjusted, and we were able to make most of that permanent, which is a unique thing. So that's the part that I'm most excited about, is we're going to have predictability for our small and large businesses to be able to operate over the next foreseeable decades, unless there's major changes that happen. But we're going to be able to see, they're going to know what their if you're an S corp, you're going to know that you're going to have 199 Cap A as a big part of it. That's a 23% deduction in what's called your qualified business income. You're going to know you have that, and it's not going to be just a 3-year deal. They're going to have that in perpetuity unless something changes, and we're going to know whether it's going to change well in advance. So it's exciting. I know it's super wonky, but those of you that are interested in true budget matters, you have to look at revenues and you have to look at expenses. And we've seen positive revenue growth, not enough to overcome our deficits, which I hope we get a chance to talk about, but that making it so the economy, U.S. companies, individuals know what they're going to be paying in taxes is key. I would love to talk more about the individual side, child tax credit, things like that. I'll kind of, if that's an area we go, that's great. But those are all made permanent, all those things that were done, and we even enhanced them more than we even thought we could. So it was exciting.
Well, let's stay on taxes for a minute, because when we spoke with you last year as part of this congressional series, and you joined our Sutherland podcast, Defending Ideas, if memory serves, the term you used was that 2025 was going to be the Super Bowl of tax policy.
That's what our chairman always called it.
Okay, so looking now...
And he's a Kansas City Chiefs fan, so he's always thinking he's going to be in the Super Bowl. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is.
Well, did we win the Super Bowl of tax policy, so to speak? Maybe highlighting other elements that you think are wins for American taxpayers, and what's next?
Yeah, so I hope at least the folks in my district understand that I do my best to call balls and strikes, right? And so there was a lot of hot debate over this reconciliation bill, whether it was a win or a loss, right? When you're in the minority, you will use any moment to message against the majority, right? Because your goal is to get back into the majority. We did it too. When we were in the minority, we were constantly messaging. So there's a lot of messaging that goes on about this particular tax bill. But when you look at the bare bones of it, the vast majority, child tax credit, the standard deduction, those two things are capped income levels. You can actually take advantage of those benefits if you make over a certain level of income. It's not like you don't make over $1 billion. You make over like $300,000 in some of those cases, right? So the vast majority of the provisions of this tax bill go to benefit the middle and lower income Americans, from child tax credit to standard deduction increase and those enhancements. And then you have all the things like tax on tips, and those are brand new. Tax on tips, no tax on overtime. Sorry, no tax on tips. The new car loan, right? So you can deduct interest from your mortgage, and you're able to deduct interest from an American-made vehicle. Like, these are all new provisions that we put on a 4-year timeline. But the provisions that we have from 2017 that we've had a chance to sort of study and monitor and really dig into the data on, most of those we were able to make permanent. And then the new things we put on a 4-year timeline to give it some level of, hey, let's test it out. Let's try this out. Let's see how it works. So I think it's a huge win. Putting pro-growth tax policy in a permanent basis is a significant win that companies and individuals can look and say, I know what my tax situation is going to be like. I now feel more comfortable making a strong investment here, hiring a few more people, because when you put research and development, and this is something Republicans learned from 2017, we had to put research and development deduction on the chopping block. We had to do it because of the rules that we have to live by within the confines of scoring mechanisms in Congress. But we looked at that and said, oh, we hope that doesn't stay permanent, and it was starting to. And we used this bill to sort of rectify what I think was probably a very tough decision. I wasn't there to make that decision in 2017, but we rectified it and got that back to being permanent. So a company's like, I'm going to invest in American-made research and development. I'm going to hire a few more people, and I know that I'm going to be able to get a good tax incentive from it, and that gives me a chance to do those two things: buy more equipment, hire more people. Then when you purchase that equipment, that company that you bought it from, they have to pay taxes on their transaction. That's why we say you want to create as much activity in the economy as possible, and by keeping the rates competitive, you give companies an opportunity to have a little bit more confidence in moving forward in the market. So I think it's going to be a significant win, and hopefully that bears out.
You mentioned federal spending and deficits. Let's go to that briefly. Specifically, that's an issue that's been a priority of yours since you were first elected. The recognition that you have argued before, the federal government spends too much money. We need to get our deficits under control. Talk about that issue in the context of this bill, because there's been a lot of debate, as you said. So what's your perspective on that element?
Yeah, how could Congressman Moore care about the deficit, but then he just voted for a bill that's going to add $3 trillion to the deficit? Like, what gives, right? This is something that I've had a chance to address quite a bit, and I love taking the questions on it. There's one fundamental difference in between how the CBO scored the bill and how we scored the bill to move it forward. So the Budget Committee got together and said, look, we are very conscious about the deficit here, and we want to make this bill at a minimum deficit neutral. We hope that the economy has strong enough numbers, plus all the other things that are happening within the administration on some reduction of spending, as well as energy production and, I hate the tough word to say that I'm still very leery of is tariffs. And what ultimately comes from that as far as a deficit reducer. So there's all sorts of things out there, but for the bill itself, we're like, hey, we just want to bring this bill as in a deficit neutral manner. We believe, looking back on the last 10 years, that has averaged a 2.5% real GDP growth rate. We believe we can accomplish that. So we put a 2.6% marker down. We said we believe we can grow the economy at 2.6%. With that will be a significant offset to the cost of any time you reduce taxes on paper, there becomes a cost to it. So we're dealing with that structure. And that 2.6 growth rate, we hope we see that over the next 10 years. Last quarter was 3, right? Great. One quarter doesn't make an economy, but it's a good indicator. Stock market's never been higher. It's had its record. Those are all good indicators. I'm going to need to see 6 months of it, though, till I'm fully comfortable knowing that we're at least a 2.6% growth rate. I hope we exceed it. The CBO used a 1.8% growth rate for all the reasons that they wanted to use their 1%. They were assuming some taxes were coming back. When you have a heavier tax burden on companies, you're going to likely see a lower growth rate. And so they were making an assumption of 1.8. That's fine for them to do that. My job is to be very candid and honest and say, hey, we had this bill assumed a 2.6. We've got the data and the justification to do that, but it is different than the CBO. So the CBO is the organization that does get to full ultimately that and JCT, Joint Committee on Tax. Those numbers, they get to have those out there, and we're subject to that criticism. Totally fair. But we think that those aren't necessarily accurate, and we don't believe they're accurate because from 2017 to today, they haven't been accurate. Our baseline has been much better based off of the growth that we've seen since 2017. So we're taking a very smart approach to look at it, but we get that it's going to be criticized because we use those numbers. I've actually argued we'll use the same CBO numbers to criticize a Democrat bill, and I'm like, you guys, you got to remember, we don't love the CBO's numbers on when we're running the bill either. So we should temper this a little bit and look at when Democrats run a bill like for the American Rescue Plan. That was the 2021 reconciliation bill that they did. that was a partisan simple majority bill. That's a heavy spend bill. Republicans do a heavy tax reduction. We didn't really reduce taxes because we just kept them from going up at the end of this year. But for the most part, we kept them in check, right? Those are where the two priorities are. So if you have a Republican-led Congress and White House, you're going to see taxation in that as the focus, and a reduction of taxes. When Democrats have the control, you're going to see a bill like ARPA, American Rescue Plan, come into play, and that was a heavy spend bill, right? And it was partly a stimulus bill to come out of COVID and stuff too, but it juices the economy so much with the monetary supply that you do see some inflation come from that. Those are the two differences. But, the revenue still grew from ARPA, because when you spend and you provide that revenue, there's still taxes paid on it, so you see tax revenues. I think the more realistic approach is giving companies and families the ability to choose where that money goes by lowering their taxes, and then they will go and participate in the economy in different ways. That's just the nature of how it all plays out. But remember, in the 118th Congress, we had over 350 Republicans and Democrats join on to a tax bill that enhanced the child tax credit, that also reestablished R&D, that bonus depreciation, all that, and didn't touch the corporate tax rate. So do not buy into the narrative that Democrats hate everything about this tax world that we just established. They don't. But in the world of Washington politics, we have to constantly bicker at each other. So the next midterm play is always a big fight.
Well, let's talk about another area where there's some of that bickering that has happened, for lack of a better term. One of the other provisions of this bill was making some reforms to the nation's social welfare system, specifically Medicaid and food stamps. And it added work requirements for Medicaid, it expanded work requirements for food stamps. And that was also an area of big debate when the bill was being discussed. What's your perspective on those reforms specifically?
So so let's talk Medicaid real quick. I hosted a big roundtable with a lot of people that were very leery and concerned about the changes that were going to be made. And almost to a person, these are amazing advocates within the community. These people work in tough situations, and they're supporting the most vulnerable among us, right? And almost to every single person, I said, we do not disagree with the policy of this bill. Essentially, it's 18 hours a week that we're requiring you to work or volunteer or in a type of job training program. And it doesn't even require every month. It's not even all 12 months, but you've got to be showing some positive progress towards some self-reliability on that front. Able-bodied, and the able-bodied, no dependent aspect with a plethora of exemptions. And if you look at the exemption list, you're like, okay, you've covered a lot of potential situations. Somebody with a mental disorder, somebody that, anybody with children that are under 14, I believe, they're not subject to this. So we're saying no dependents, able-bodied, you got to be working 20 hours a week. And that policy's sound. Now the issue is, when, let's say we've got someone that's leaving, that's served their prison time, and they're coming out back into the workforce, and they haven't had a chance to establish a job yet, and they get hurt, and then they go to the hospital, and then it's a big cost, and then it spirals, and then they get into that cycle of destruction again. What about an individual has addiction problems? That they need the Medicaid resources in order to help support their addiction so they can be in a stable enough position to maintain a job. We are talking about a chicken or egg type of situation here, but I believe that the next 18 months we'll have time to sort of clear the deck with all this and make sure the education is there and communicate this to people. It's still a very small portion of the population that fits in that able-bodied, no dependent situation that aren't currently working, because most still are, right? That's the good thing, is most still are working, and that's a positive thing. We just want to make sure that we keep that culture of work associated with our social programs. And I'm hopeful that this bears out, that this was, all of the criticism and everything about this it was overblown. And there's going to be a few of those cases, and hopefully that our safety nets within our own community can also help those individuals. I remember doing stuff with my previous consulting firm. We would go to Odyssey House for a day, a couple days a year, and provide interview prep and resume creation with the patrons, the participants in that program. Odyssey House is mostly addiction recovery group of people, and I think there's a strong enough community base that those that would potentially fall through the cracks in something like this, we can get them back on their feet. But nobody really disagrees with the concept of working 20 hours a week for a portion of the year, right? And that's where there's another side to the food stamp piece, and this is primarily based on improper payments. So we have a several $100 billion improper payment problem in our government, right? When you run big programs like this, there's a lot of loopholes that come through. Sometimes you're overpaying, sometimes you're underpaying. Regardless, it's an improper payment problem, and there's error rates associated with this. Utah does a really good job at managing this and making sure that the resources that somebody should be getting SNAP benefits, again, this is nutrition, food stamps, things like that, are going to the people that deserve them and that need them. And it is not a significant error rate. Other states do. So we're requiring, like, you got to get to a point where your error rate is low, is in the reasonable low number, right? And it's never going to be perfect. But those are the kind of changes that we made. But that took me, 4, 5, 7 minutes to explain? That doesn't work well in today's politics. What you can say is, oh, Republicans just passed a bill that's going to take 19 million people or 13 million people off Medicaid. Well, that's because the scoring mechanisms and the predictions of some of this, they're faulty. I don't think those numbers are going to even be close to that. And they can all work to become eligible. But based off of just predictions, those numbers come out, and that's what gets repeated. That's what hits the headlines. And it's unfortunate, but that is too. And look, as a balls and strikes guy, the infrastructure bill, when we were in the minority, the infrastructure bill, we would use, it was a $1.3 trillion bill, right? And it's my understanding of it, and I don't quote me on any of the specific numbers, but half of that bill was core infrastructure, right? Roads, bridges, that kind of thing. Then that was like the first 600 billion, let's say. Then the additional 600, 700 billion, there was other things like EV chargers and stuff like that Republicans don't always go out and support. Say like, great if you do that, but that shouldn't be the federal government's job to dictate where those particular things are. And so the second half of that bill wasn't all core infrastructure. Still some of it was. And we would say, oh, only X percent of that is core infrastructure, but that's above the initial 600 that pretty much everybody agreed on. Like, there's ways to misconstrue it, that you hit a narrative and you hit a headline, but you don't actually hit the truth and the reality. And it's a frustrating part. But again, that takes time to explain. And I don't really do well. I'm not a good headline guy, right? I would rather talk in a forum like this and even take questions here in a minute to explain the difference between the two. But this tax bill, hopefully I was able to explain why it's good to have competitive taxes so we can continue to establish and grow that revenue within the U.S. And then on the social programs, those are tweaks and changes that I think most people would think are reasonable. We have to address improper payments. We've had bills that have done it. I've done a bill on TANF. My committee has always done these types of things. There's little tweaks here or there that Republicans and Democrats disagree with, and like 80% we don't, but we always let the 20% be part of the reason that we don't end up passing that bill. Improper payments is an area that I hope we can continue to come together on and find ways to do it. That's what we tried to implement through a lot of the SNAP piece.
One of the ways that it seems that those provisions can be described, when you're talking about narratives, the way people articulate it, is that it's a very robust step for the federal government to try and encourage or incentivize work or connect more folks with work who are on these social programs. And kind of the flip side of that coin, if we look at work incentives over here, the other side is work disincentives. And you've spoken previously, you actually spoke at a Sutherland event last year via video message about some of the disincentives that are kind of inadvertently built into our social welfare system in the form of benefit cliffs, where some folks, if they earn a little bit more, the decrease in benefits can eclipse what they're gaining from their earned income. It's an issue we've been working a lot on here in Utah and elsewhere.
When you say the word Sutherland Institute, like I make it synonymous with benefit cliffs. Like, you've done a really good job of putting that out there, and so I appreciate the work that's being done on it.
Thank you, and that's my question, is kind of what do you see in this bill with these work incentives or work supports in SNAP and Medicaid that how do you view those in the context of additional need to address benefit cliffs? Is this kind of a first step to broader welfare reform in your mind?
We don't do enough to address benefit cliffs in this bill. I don't see enough initiative in Congress to actually address it. And one of the reasons why, and this hopefully will frustrate all of you, any reasonable-minded person could look and say, if you curve these a little differently, so you continue to say, okay, so if you continue to get a job, get a promotion, make a little bit more money, and then the benefit starts ticking down. If you just smooth those curves out a little bit, which we've done those type of experiments where you actually look at the graphical nature of it, in the long run, it's significantly better because there's more people getting off the social welfare programs, which is, from what I've seen, what every single person wants, regardless of party. But we're not doing enough to address those cliffs. The reason why is because there's a cost associated with it that on paper is hard to overcome. So if I were to put up a bill that would solve this problem and move these benefit cliffs into a more reasonable runway, that bill is going to be several tens of, maybe $100 billion in the grand scheme of things. But deep down, I know the numbers will play out differently. But we've got these scoring agencies that we have to, sort of adhere to, or at least they get published when we do legislation, and it's like it's an internal problem, because we're like, I know this will be better ultimately and will cost us less, but in the interim it's going to look like it costs us more, so I'm not going to be able to rally the support to be able to do it. And that's kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with regards to the debt score, the deficit score with our reconciliation bill. Is like, we knew we had to assume a different growth rate because we don't think that that's accurate. Again, it's the tough aspect. There's nothing. It makes absolute sense. You should be getting your benefits reduced as you make more money, and if you make those more of a reasonable graph, then we can win this one. But it's very difficult to go get the support when the bill is going to look like it costs a lot.
Given the challenges you've articulated with trying to pursue some of these reforms on the federal level, I want to ask you about how you see states factoring in, and ideas like empowering states with some more flexibility, super waivers, like a sandbox kind of concept. There are a lot of ideas floated around out there about what authority states have, because as you know right now, they have some limited authority to innovate, but they also run up against rules and laws where the federal government is dominant over those areas of these particular programs. How do you envision, or how would you like to see this issue proceed as a nation in a way that leverages state ability to be innovative?
I just want to see more pilot programs. Very simple. This is the same way I would tackle this if I was in the consulting world still. Speaker Schultz has come to our office and the delegation for a potential idea of, hey, look, we'll take 90% of the funding that was otherwise going to come to us. We'll take a cut in the total dollars if they will let us, kind of run this our own way. We will hire the contractors. We will decide who does what. And ultimately, it's one project, right? It's a couple things. Part of it's because we want to get going for the Olympics and we want to make sure that we have our infrastructure needs and stuff. But if you do some of those types of projects, I think if you're honest about it, and you looked and you saw the outcome and say, okay, Utah decided to do this, we gave them a little less money, and look what they accomplished. Okay, what problems do we have with this? You have the Democrats go nitpick it and be like, well, this actually served an underprivileged community. This was something that they used to put a first and last mile element to UTA, right? That's not the plan, but that's always a consideration. The UTA is always looking for ways to expand their service to more of the neighborhoods and everything that they can do that. We look at that and say, okay, I think that they did that quite responsibly. And Republicans will look at it and say, good, they're sticking to the core infrastructure and we're doing all the right, and you can look to see, once you get some of those pilots done, you got to have an administration that's willing to do it. And you got to have sincerity on looking back and evaluating it in the right way. And I think we have the best opportunity to do it with education right now. My son is on an IEP, right? My son is on the autism spectrum. He participates in probably one of the neatest programs that I've seen delivered in a public school system. He goes to Emerson Elementary, and he's integrated where he does really well, and then he's with some of his cohort that also have some developmental delays, and they go and give him the special attention that he needs. And part of those dollars come from, the special education side of the federal government. And we have to be willing to trust our states to be able to take some of those dollars and implement. I think if the federal government were to continue on with some of the spending, if you cut the spigot off right away, it causes chaos. But if you reduce it and give the states more responsibility and autonomy to run it, you can make that go in the right direction. We saw June 25 over June 24. Just taking a month snapshot, we saw a significant decrease in on our deficit, right? Initially, it was reported that we ran a surplus. I don't believe that's the case. I think there was a clerical error on when the weekend hit, like the last day of the week or something like that. I don't have all the specifics in front of me, but regardless, we had a significant decrease in our deficits. Again, 1 month doesn't make a deficit reduction plan, and if you can do that over time and still have the services that are needed and outcomes that we want, then you keep moving in that direction.
Just remember, we will go to audience questions in just a minute. I want to ask you one last question about this big 6 months or so of legislative debate that yielded the one big beautiful bill, or the mega bill. That does have a nice ring to it.
Mega Act, mega bill, it's great.
Too bad that you weren't successful in that.
There's a party of two that believes it's a better name.
But the last thing I want to ask is, in these pieces of legislation, as we all know, that they're massive, there's a lot in there. Is there anything in this bill that you think is either getting totally ignored in the public discussion and the press coverage, or is getting misconstrued that you just want to kind of clarify for the record? What do we need to know?
It's simple. Where do billionaires live? They live on Long Island, in the Hamptons, okay? And they have a couple properties out there. So when you're wealthy and you have a second home or a third home, you pay extra state and local taxes. Republicans capped that number. Before we did 2017 bill, it was an unlimited number, right? There's some adjustments that get made in AMT and things like that. But wealthy people had a huge tax break because they were able to write off the property taxes that they pay on a second home in the Hamptons, right? Republicans capped it at $10,000. So wealthy people could no longer write that off, and they had to pay more federal taxes. The concept that our tax policy only benefits the billionaires is a huge misconception. It's dishonest. It is the world of Washington politics that I live in. But I would say that's clearly the biggest. The majority of this tax bill, there's two provisions that if you want to look at the scoring aspect of it, there's two provisions that constitute more than half of the entire bill. It's the child tax credit, and that's the standard deduction. There isn't a single billionaire that takes advantage of the standard deduction. They itemize their taxes. Standard deduction is taken advantage of by middle and lower income Americans. And they do that because it simplifies, makes it easier. There's one other thing I want to positively highlight, though, in addition to that. So I hope you folks can accept that, and if you look at the information and look at the actual data, that's the case. But we did something. When Republicans did increase the standard deduction and people weren't doing as much itemizing of their taxes, well, something fell through the cracks. Gifts, charitable contributions. So every time you would make a $100 contribution, you'd go to a Boys and Girls Club dinner, you'd pay a tithe to your church, you'd give to the United Way, or you'd donate to Red Cross when there was a tragic event that happened. You would always get a receipt, and then you send that to your accountant, and then that is a tax deduction. You lower your taxable liability. Well, when you have the standard deduction, you can make $10,000 worth of charitable contributions. It's still better for you to take the standard deduction, and that's provided to everybody. We want to simplify the tax code, everything. But you started to see fewer small dollar donations going to charities because they weren't necessarily incented to give to charity via the tax code. You're incented to do it for the goodness of your heart and for the need. So don't misconstrue that, what I'm saying, but we worked on something called the Charitable Act that allows you to take the standard deduction and then a little bit, it's called an above the line deduction up to $1,000. So you could go to 10 events and contribute $100, and you get actually a tax break for that. That was accomplished in this bill. It doesn't gain a lot of attention, but it's a unique thing that Senator Lankford and I, he's a big supporter of charities. I worked a lot in social impact. My consulting firm partnered a lot with Sorensen Social Impact and did a lot of joint stuff together. So there's a unique nature to that that we were able to do. That was my bill that got passed in this deal, and it's good. United Way and people like that really appreciate it. It doesn't solve all the problems in the world. Still, it's not like it's a $10,000 provision. I don't think that would be fiscally responsible, but it was a $1,000 provision, and we want to encourage people to still give those small dollar donations to the Salvation Army and that kind of stuff.
One last question before we conclude the live stream portion of the event. What's next on the policy front? Looking out into the remaining months of 2025 into 2026, what policy issues do you envision being top priorities? What do you hope to work on? Anything you did that you want to mention that we haven't covered so far?
Well, everybody's getting along so well back there. It's going to be just a breeze to get all this done. Now, you got to get through the appropriations process. Remember, appropriations process is about 22% of our total budget. So it's a small portion of it, but it becomes the largest and the most attention-getting fights that happen, because at the end of September, there'll be a fiscal decision to make. Do we go to a shutdown? Do we do a CR? Or do we finalize the bills? We will not finalize the bills. I don't believe the Senate will be done in time to finalize by the end of September. I think that's a foregone conclusion. They've become the House. So we will get, I think, probably 75 to 80% of the funding all done and passed and sent over to the Senate. Now, those are partisan bills, so those don't get any Democrats to vote in support of them, and we'll pass them on a simple majority and send them to the Senate. We know they'll need to be reworked in the Senate to get to 60 votes, but these have to pass with 60 votes in the Senate, and so they'll go through their process. That's why it takes them a little longer. I'm not just complaining about the Senate. I love to do that, but I'm showing you the reason why. They won't be done in time to get this by September, so we're going to have to make. I assume we'll do a short-term CR until the December timeframe. Hopefully, by that time, we'll finish the bills. What I hate seeing is the shutdown, just so some people can get their, grab attention headlines and things like that. Those aren't productive. And if you go into a shutdown, you usually get a worse deal coming out of it than you would right before a shutdown. That's just the inside baseball on that world. But I hope we can finalize these bills and look and say, hey, we're going to cap this spending, and any extra defense spending that we needed to really accomplish, we were able to do in the MEGA Act. The MEGA, it rolls off the tongue better. And so that doesn't become a sticking point, and we can go and get these bills done. Hopefully there's enough motivation to do it and not just CR it for another year, because there's a lot of things that we need to be, addressed, refreshed, and I don't want to just keep using, previous policy funding on that type of stuff. So that's going to be a big fight. We've got to get together and figure out with a secured border, how do we codify that? How do we make sure that that is the law of the land now? And I know many Democrats are good with that, but we just can't make this a back and forth thing. And we've got to come up with an immigration plan that can prioritize work and prioritize the right type of good people that are willing to work here, because we have a major problem. We've got a heavy number of retirees, and we need to have a stronger participation rate and more people working and paying taxes. So an immigration plan that can work for the next 30 years would be excellent. And I've seen some glimmer of the Trump administration indicating that we got to make sure ag is taken care of, and the manufacturing, and there's all these types of things that there's an opportunity there. I don't think it's imminent right now, but the spending fights will go on for the fall. But immigration's got to be something we've got to do. And of course, I love the debt commission that we passed in the 118th Congress, and it ultimately didn't pass. It didn't get to the floor out of the House of Representatives. Frustratingly, on my side, we didn't see it through, and we even had we had a handful of Democrats out of committee that were willing to support it. And I think we would have gotten more Democrats on the floor if we would have done it. But we have to do a debt commission within the next 2 years. If we don't, we're not addressing the reality of the major mandatory spending programs that have to be addressed over the next 10 years. Because if not, we'll continue to run deficits, and it won't really matter what our taxation is.
Thank you, Congressman. Everyone in the room, please keep your seats. We will end the live stream portion of our event. Once again, want to thank Hinckley Institute for this wonderful venue and Zions Bank for sponsoring. So let's please give a round of applause to the Congressman and say thank you to our live stream audience.